So, dili na nato dugay-dugayon, no? Ato nang una natong pangutana ni Sir Rabi is what is the importance of changing our healthy habits? So, Sir Rabi, pwede nimo i-discuss or isulti sa ilahag kung may mga uh, sa importansya sa pag uh, create sa tuang healthy habits, no?
A lot of what we do revolve around patterns of behavior. And one way we can define habits is by seeing them as that, seeing them as patterns of talking, patterns of moving around. It's composed when you break down the concept of a habit. It's composed of these elementary or smaller pieces that refer to feelings and ways of thinking, ways of being and doing things that we do over time. And habits are important when we look at ourselves and more specifically our mental health because a lot of what we do and a lot of how we are as human beings revolve around these patterns. We're talking about sets of things that we say. These are verbal behaviors. We can refer to internal experiences, such as the way we subjectively feel through our emotions, as comprising these habits. It can be said that when we look at human nature, when we look at human behavior, from the things that we do at work to what we do intimately with loved ones, at home, with our families, in the communities, that comprises or that shows you what we do out of habit. In fact, when you were preparing for this podcast, you mentioned, Jurley, this idea that you stumbled upon. It's a very common or popular belief to say or to describe the human being as creatures of habit. And that phrase, I think, summarizes just how important and relevant habits are in trying to understand the way we are as human beings. The importance of habits isn't just constrained or limited to how we are as Homo sapiens. Other animals, such as hamsters, dolphins, aquatic creatures, birds, even we can debate or argue far more basic uh, living things, such as unicellular creatures at the microscopic level, have habits. They have patterns of behavior. They move and operate and do what they do in a certain way. So habits aren't just important in understanding how we are as human beings, the way we tick. It's also important that relevance also extends to every other living creature, I dare say, in the planet. So it's relevant because it's something that summarily describes who we are. If you want to know a particular person, whether at a very intimate level, whether you want to know a group of individuals, as in how people are in a particular organization, factory, or company, or whether it's about knowing a population, like people who live in a particular geographical area, it would be wise to ask the question, what are the habits of this person? What are the habits of this particular group of individuals? What are the habits that define this particular culture? So it's relevant in many ways, not only to human beings, as I put it at the first part of my response. It's also relevant in so many different levels, whether you're looking at the individual level, the mezzo level, as it's said, with groups and that smaller and larger groups, or with whole communities, with whole societies. Habits define and give us a snapshot of a thumbnail, if you will, of how we can understand particular persons, groups of persons, and whole populations. The second way that habits are important, apart from the first, which we spoke about, that is they uh, they tell us something about how organisms tick. The second idea, which is it gives you that thumbnail or that sketch of how people, groups of people, and whole societies are. That leads us to the third importance of uh, why psychology and why all the rest of us, whether we're in different fields such as medicine or whether we're in the field of education, why we should bother about habits. And I think this third one is particularly human. And I would like to introduce you and all those who are listening to us tonight, whether you're in a different time zone, it might be the day where you are at the moment, to the work I did to complete my clinical psychology graduate studies. So back in March 2013, I presented my graduate thesis entitled Beyond the Trees and the Forests, Surveying the Valley of Personality Psychology through a Proposed Meta-Theory. And I'm introducing this to you and to all those out there who are listening to this discussion, to this talk, because I believe what I found out in that thesis responds to the question, this first one that you mentioned, and the other questions which you might have about habits, their relevance, how to change them, and so on and so forth. What I did in that thesis was to analyze 218 documents or 218 texts. In the textual analysis of these 218 documents, I found out these were all documents that said something about personality. And when I said that habits are relevant because they describe an organism and the way we tick, the way we behave, and that habits are important to understand and to know more about because they can give you a summary, a bird's eye view of not just a particular or a specific organism, but also an individual, a human person, groups of persons, and whole communities. I looked at 218 personality articles, if you will say, and I found out that there were 32 conceptual lenses and 4 super lenses, which part of these lenses talk about responses to this question. So I'd like to go to page 108 of the manuscript. What I have with me right now is a manuscript of that thesis. And in that page, I wrote a section entitled Behavioral Project. And this, I think, underlines and reinforces what I've been saying in the last 15 minutes. I hope you will allow me to read that part. It says, and I quote, I wrote, and I quote, a list of other themes concerned constructs borrowed from approaches to personality. And these were very similar to the groupings where such schools or traditions like cognitive, logical, radical, classical, Watsonian, Skinnerian behaviorism. At first glance, it may seem like these 4 thematic clusters are differentiated. When viewed from a different angle, however, one will see several red threads which form the undercurrent of a behavioral project. This is the third response to your question. It's important to study habits because they underpin what in my graduate thesis I termed the behavioral project. What is this behavioral project? Most notable of these red threads which define this behavioral project, the third and final reason habits are important for us to study, would be behaviorism making behavior the primary or focal datum within personality science. The analyzed themes, I continue to write, point out to the idea that having enjoyed enormous popularity within psychology and having wielded influence in the discipline, albeit for a limited period, behaviorism had made it a point to turn the gaze of personality science towards behavior as the unit of primary interest, even at times suggesting more extremely that the notion that behavior might be the only scientifically viable object for study. In other words, what this part of my graduate thesis says about the importance of habits is that behaviorism, you can say that habits are behaviors. Of course, as I've defined them, I believe they include more than just behaviors, but in the main, habits are patterns of behaviors. And what the behavioral project did around the start of, I would say, the 19th or 20th centuries was to acknowledge that it's important to be looking at behaviors or habits because these behaviors or habits are things that we can quickly see, things that we can quickly understand, observe from people. And because we can observe them, Julie, it's easier to be able to change them. That is, habits seem to be the key to changing how we are as human beings. Other people might believe that the key to changing the way we are is to look at our feelings or to look at our thoughts. But for the behavioral project, and I suppose when we look at habits, habits are the key to change human persons. When you change habits, you change human beings. When you change the habit of one person or a group of persons or an entire community, such as the health habits, masking is a habit, for example. Because we've been through the pandemic, we can talk about health-related habits, such as masking, putting on a mask. This wasn't a habit before. To change habits, to establish habits which were not there in groups of people, the key is behavior, not feelings, not thoughts, at least for the behavioral project. So the third reason why habits are important for psychology to look into is because they are keys to change. Of course, needless to say, this is positive change. We can also think about very bad changes because there are also bad habits, right? So those are the three reasons why I think habits are important. First, they tend to define an organism and the way that organism lives out its life. Second, they provide summary descriptions. If you want to understand someone quickly, understand a habit, right? So it's like a shortcut. It's like a shortcut for understanding someone. Thirdly, habits are important to be looking into because when you change habits, you change human beings. When you change the habits of a dog or a pet, you change that pet. You change that creature or you change that organism. So that's the third and final reason why habits are of so much relevance.